Imagine a cold so deep it feels like it could snap bone. Outside, the wind is screaming and the temperature has plummeted to minus 30 degrees Celsius. Inside the longhouse, the firewood stockpile is empty. In a modern home, this is a crisis. For a Viking, it was just another Tuesday. They didn't panic because they had already turned their home into a thermal battery. The secret weapon wasn't wood, it was stone. Specifically soapstone. This dense, toss-rich rock has a magical property, incredibly high thermal mass. It absorbs heat like a sponge absorbs water. During the day, while the cooking fires were roaring, Vikings would place large slabs of soapstone directly into the embers. These weren't just rocks, they were energy storage units. As the fire died down in the evening, they would wrap these glowing stones in thick wool or leather. Placed at the foot of a bed, a single stone could radiate a gentle, life-saving warmth for up to 8 hours. It was the original hot water bottle, but one that could last through the longest Nordic night. They essentially time-shifted their heat, capturing the energy of the day to survive the freeze of the night. But a warm bed is useless if the house itself is a freezer. To solve this, the Vikings didn't just build shelters. They engineered thermodynamic machines. The longhouse was a masterpiece of airflow management designed to trap heat without suffocating the inhabitants. A Viking longhouse looks like an overturned boat for a reason. The curved roof and low walls were aerodynamic, allowing gale-force winds to slip over the structure rather than smashing into it. But the real genius was inside. With no chimney, you might think the house would be a smoke chamber. However, they installed adjustable vents high in the gable ends. As hot smoke rose, it exited these vents, creating a vacuum that pulled fresh air in through low gaps in the walls. This natural convection current kept the air breathable while trapping a layer of warm, smoky air near the ceiling. To exploit this, the Vikings didn't sleep on the floor. The ground is a heat sink that will drain the life out of you. Instead, they built raised wooden platforms along the walls. By elevating their sleeping quarters, they placed themselves directly into the Goldilocks zone, above the cold draft of the floor, but below the choking smoke of the ceiling. They were literally living in the warmest layer of air available. It was passive HVAC engineering achieved 1,000 years before electricity. However, insulation only keeps heat in, it doesn't create it. When the firewood ran out, they turned to a heat source that didn't need chopping or drying. They turned to the living, breathing furnaces standing in the next room. If you walked into a longhouse at night, you wouldn't just hear snoring, you would hear chewing. Vikings often brought their livestock indoors for the winter. The longhouse was divided into the human end and the animal end, separated only by a thin wooden partition. This wasn't because they loved the smell of manure, it was a calculated survival strategy. A single 1,000-pound dairy cow generates about 3,000 poos of body heat per hour, roughly the same output as a modern electric space heater. Now imagine 10 cows, 20 sheep, and a few goats packed into the far end of your house. The combined body heat of the herd acted as a massive biological radiator. This warmth would radiate through the partition, raising the ambient temperature of the entire structure by 10 to 15 degrees Fahrenheit. It was a symbiotic relationship. The humans provided shelter from the wolves and the snow, and the animals provided the heat that kept the humans alive. It was messy, it was smelly, but it was incredibly effective. But keeping the heat in required more than just wooden walls. The Vikings wrapped their homes in the best insulator. They had something they stood on every day, the earth itself. We use pink fiberglass to insulate our walls. The Vikings used dirt, specifically turf. They would cut thick rectangular blocks of sod, complete with the tangled root systems of the grass, and stack them like bricks to form walls that could be 6 feet thick. This wasn't just a pile of mud, it was a complex matrix. The millions of tiny air pockets trapped within the root systems acted as a thermal break, stopping the cold dead in its tracks. A well-built turf house is essentially a subterranean cave built above ground. The thermal mass of the earth walls meant that the house regulated its own temperature. During the day, the walls would absorb the weak sunlight, and at night, they would slowly release that stored energy back into the room. It was efficient, sustainable, and free. Visually, these houses disappeared into the landscape, offering camouflage from raiders, but physically, they felt like a warm embrace from the earth itself. So, the house is warm and the bed is warm. But a Viking has to go outside eventually. To survive the blizzard, they needed clothing that was smarter than modern synthetics. They needed the technology of the sheep. Modern fleece is great, but it has nothing on Viking wool. The secret wasn't just the fiber, it was the grease. Vikings didn't scour the lanolin, the natural oil produced by sheepskin, out of their wool. This waxy substance made their cloaks naturally waterproof. Rain and snow would beat up and roll off rather than soaking in. But the real magic of wool is its ability to heat you up even when wet. Unlike cotton, which kills you when damp, wool can absorb 30% of its weight in water and still trap body heat. They wore this miracle fiber in layers. A soft linen undertunic wicking sweat away from the skin. A middle layer of wool trapped warm air. And a heavy lanolin-soaked outer cloak acted as a windbreaker and rain shell. It was a sophisticated multi-layer system that allowed them to regulate their temperature whether they were rowing a ship or sitting in a hall. But sometimes even wool isn't enough. When the fire is dead and the wind is howling, you need a heat source that comes from underneath you. This brings us to the most bizarre and brilliant hack of all, the self-heating bed. This sounds disgusting to modern ears, but it saved lives. The Vikings understood the principle of aerobic decomposition. When organic matter rots, it releases heat. Think of a compost pile steaming on a cold morning. To harness this, they would build the base of their beds with twigs for airflow, then pile on layers of old straw, dried leaves, and yes, animal manure. This organic mixture would slowly decompose beneath the sleeping platform, generating a steady low-grade heat of around 20 to 30 degrees Celsius. They would cover this compost core with fresh straw and heavy furs to block the smell and keep the sleeper clean. The result was a heated mattress pad powered by biology. It was a zero-energy solution that turned waste into warmth, proving that the Vikings were masters of using every resource available. They heated their homes, their beds, and their bodies from the outside. But to truly conquer the cold, they had to stoke the internal furnace. They had to eat for heat. A Viking meal wasn't just food, it was fuel. They instinctively understood diet-induced thermogenesis, the fact that digestion creates body heat. But not all foods are created equal. Protein and fat are the high-octane fuels of the metabolic world. Digesting them generates significantly more heat than digesting carbs. So the Viking winter diet was heavy on smoked fish, dried meat, and dairy. They would eat chunks of whale blubber, rich cheeses, and butter by the spoonful. As their bodies broke down these dense calories, their metabolism ramped up, raising their core temperature from the inside out. It was like throwing a log on the internal fire. They also utilized heat shocks. The badstufa, or steam bath, was a ritual where they would superheat rocks and pour water over them, creating a steam explosion that raised their body temperature to feverish levels. This wasn't just for hygiene, it was a reset button for the circulatory system. After roasting in the steam, they would roll in the snow, forcing their blood vessels to constrict and then dilate, flushing the body with warmth that lasted for hours. It was a physiological hack that kept their blood pumping in the deepest freeze. Ultimately, all the rocks, wool, and compost in the world couldn't replace the most efficient heater of all, another human being. The Viking longhouse was a communal space, often housing 30 or 40 people. This wasn't because they lacked space, It was because they needed each other's beasts. A sleeping human radiates about 100 watts of heat. 30 Vikings sleeping in a pile generates 3 kilowatts of power, enough to heat a modern apartment. They slept huddled together under massive piles of furs, sharing body warmth in a survival cuddle. This forced intimacy did more than keep them alive. It forged the unbreakable social bonds that defined their culture. In the dark, warm, smoky air of the longhouse, they told stories, planned raids, and became a single organism fighting against the cold. The Vikings didn't just survive the winter, they mastered it. They turned rocks into batteries, walls into blankets, and dinner into a furnace. They proved that with enough ingenuity, you don't need technology to beat the elements. You just need to think like a Viking. If you want to know more about how these incredible people lived, fought, and survived, hit that subscribe button. What's the coldest temperature you've ever endured? Let us know in the comments below. Stay warm and stay wild.